Michigan, 2007. A cold case that haunted a small town for over a decade has finally been solved. Natalie Elise Cartwright, a 26-year-old elementary school music teacher, was loved by students, admired by colleagues, and cherished by neighbors. Her gentle nature and warm smile lit up the school halls, until one day she vanished. Her car was found parked near a hiking trail. The driver's side door left ajar. No signs of struggle, no sign of Natalie, just silence. For years, the case went cold. Leads dried up. Rumors swirled. The community lost hope. But in 2024, a breakthrough in DNA technology brought a suspect into custody, one no one saw coming. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. In the lakeside town of Holland, Michigan, where fall leaves dance through tree-lined streets and neighborhoods still echo with small-town values, Natalie Elise Cartwright was a quiet but radiant light. At 26, Natalie had already carved out a place in the hearts of her students and fellow faculty at East Haven Elementary. As the school's full-time music teacher, she wasn't just an instructor, she was a beacon of joy, energy, and warmth. She greeted every child by name, remembered their favorite songs, and often stayed after hours to help struggling students master the recorder or prepare for a school concert. Music followed Natalie everywhere. You could often hear soft piano melodies drifting from her open classroom door during prep periods. In the mornings, children's voices rang through the halls, rehearsing simple harmonies she had taught them the week before. "She made you feel like you mattered," one former student would later say. "Even if you couldn't hold a tune, she'd still make you part of the music." Outside of school, Natalie lived in a modest second-floor apartment on the east side of town. It wasn't far from her parents' home in Saugatuck, where she often spent weekends helping her mom in the garden or watching old musicals with her dad. Her life wasn't flashy, but it was full of purpose, of connection, of kindness. She was the kind of person who sent handwritten thank you notes and remembered birthdays, the type who brought coffee to coworkers on cold mornings and left anonymous donations for families in need during the holidays. She kept a close-knit circle of friends, most of them from her church choir or the shelter where she volunteered on Saturdays. Natalie was especially fond of animals, often fostering senior dogs or helping to organize pet adoption drives. Her faith was a quiet but steady part of her life. She played piano every Sunday at Grace Community Church, where her music often left the congregation in tears. Natalie didn't party. She wasn't involved in any drama. She had no ex-partners with bad blood, no documented feuds, no enemies. Police records would later confirm she had never filed a complaint or been the subject of one. To those around her, Natalie was the safest, most stable person they knew, someone who lived simply, loved deeply, and hurt no one. Her colleagues admired her work ethic and the personal care she gave to each child in her classroom. Parents trusted her completely, often requesting their children be placed in her music section. Administrators saw her as the kind of teacher who would one day become a mentor to new staff, someone who could shape the culture of the school for years to come. So when Natalie didn't show up to dinner with her parents one evening in October 2007, alarm bells rang quickly. She was punctual to a fault, never one to cancel plans without calling. Her phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Her parents called her friends, then her workplace. No one had heard from her since she left school that afternoon. As the hours passed and darkness settled over western Michigan, an unsettling truth began to emerge. Something was wrong, and it didn't take long for fear to take hold in the hearts of those who knew her. Because if someone like Natalie, kind, careful, beloved, could vanish without warning, then what exactly had happened in those silent hours between her final class and the missing persons report? But how could such a beloved presence disappear without a trace? It was an unseasonably warm Tuesday in mid-October 2007, and the town of Holland, Michigan was wrapped in the colors of fall. The school day at East Haven Elementary had gone by like any other. In her music classroom, Natalie Cartwright had guided second graders through their favorite song, helped a shy fifth grader prepare for an upcoming talent show, and stayed after class to organize sheet music for the upcoming fall concert. She clocked out at 4:28 p.m., according to school records, and waved goodbye to the janitor as she stepped out into the crisp autumn air. Dressed in a burgundy sweater and gray slacks, she walked to her car in the staff parking lot, carrying her tote bag filled with lesson plans and her signature red thermos. Her plan for the evening was simple: Dinner with her parents in Saugatuck, something she did at least once a week. But she never arrived. By 6:15 p.m., her mother had begun to worry. Natalie never ran late without calling. She always answered her phone. But that evening, each call went straight to voicemail. Her parents assumed at first that maybe her phone had died. Maybe she was caught in traffic. But as the clock ticked past 7:30, dread replaced concern. By 9 p.m., they were calling her friends. By midnight, they were on the phone with the police. The next morning, a local jogger running a remote trail near Lake Macatawa made a discovery that changed everything. Just off a gravel path surrounded by rustling trees and patches of tall grass sat a silver Honda Civic. The car was parked straight, engine off, windows rolled up. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, barely an inch. Inside the car, Natalie's purse lay on the passenger seat untouched. Her keys were in the center console. Her phone wasn't there. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, no damage to the vehicle. The ground nearby was undisturbed. It looked as though she had simply stepped out for a moment and vanished into the woods. Police arrived by mid-morning and quickly roped off the area. They canvassed the surrounding woods but found no footprints, no drag marks, no discarded items of clothing. The forest was quiet, offering no clues, no sounds, just stillness. Search dogs were brought in by noon. Helicopters flew overhead. Nothing. Natalie's parents stood behind the yellow tape, watching investigators comb through the brush, their faces a mix of fear and disbelief. Why would Natalie stop there? She wasn't an outdoors enthusiast. The trail was remote, a place she'd never mentioned before. It wasn't on the way to her parents' house. Investigators were baffled. There was no logical reason for her to be in that area at that time. Was it a random stop? Was she meeting someone? Had she been followed? The last confirmed sighting of Natalie remained the security camera at East Haven Elementary, showing her walking to her car. What happened in the 30-minute window between that moment and the discovery of her vehicle became the heart of the investigation. Within 24 hours, a missing person bulletin was released across the county. Flyers with her photo, smiling, hopeful, were posted in shop windows, gas stations, and church bulletin boards. The local news ran updates every hour. Volunteers from the community formed search parties. But no new clues emerged. Natalie's friends and colleagues were stunned. The idea that someone like her could simply vanish was unthinkable. Children at school asked when Miss Cartwright was coming back. Teachers struggled to find answers. As the second day passed and search teams returned empty-handed, one question grew louder in the minds of everyone watching. But why would Natalie stop at that trail? And what happened once she did? By the third day of Natalie Cartwright's disappearance, hope had begun to dim. Volunteers continued combing through brush and lakeside trails. Law enforcement expanded their perimeter outward from the spot where Natalie's car had been found, now treating the area not as a potential rendezvous point, but a likely scene of abduction. Despite the calmness of the location, trees stretching in every direction, wind rustling through golden leaves, there was a growing sense of dread among searchers. The silence didn't feel serene anymore. It felt foreboding. It was just past 4 p.m. when a cadaver dog named Jasper, part of a K-9 unit brought in from Kalamazoo County, began alerting along a thicket roughly 500 yards northwest of the trailhead. The handler stopped. The dog kept circling. Search team members moved in, calling for markers and gloves. Beneath a thin cover of dry leaves and disturbed earth, they uncovered what no one wanted to find. Natalie's body had been hastily concealed under foliage and soft soil. She was lying on her side, partially clothed, with her shoes missing. Her legs bore scratches consistent with having been dragged through brush. Her hands were scraped, fingernails broken, suggesting a struggle. Her face was bruised, her lips split. The most telling detail, though, would come later, during the autopsy. Preliminary results from the coroner's office revealed blunt force trauma to the left side of her head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. She had also been strangled. There were signs of defensive wounds on her arms and under her nails. But what stunned investigators was the lack of clear physical evidence. No murder weapon was found, no obvious fingerprints, no nearby tire tracks or discarded items. It was as if her killer had vanished into the trees. The crime scene was immediately cordoned off, and forensic teams swept through every inch of ground within a 100-yard radius. Soil samples were taken, branches examined for broken fibers, and every footprint was photographed. But the results were frustratingly thin. One partial boot print later determined to be inconclusive. A few strands of hair, none matching Natalie's. There was no blood trail leading to the scene, which meant she may have been killed elsewhere and moved. But how and why here? News broke by that evening. Body of missing music teacher found near Lake Macatawa, scrolled across TV screens. Within hours, candles and flowers appeared outside East Haven Elementary. Parents brought their children, many of whom didn't understand the full weight of what had happened. Some brought handmade cards, others just stood in silence. The grief spread quickly. Natalie's co-workers were inconsolable. Her church held an emergency service that night. Her mother, face pale and hollowed by exhaustion, asked simply for privacy. As investigators tried to form a profile, they struggled with the why. Natalie had no known enemies. No signs of romantic entanglements, no ex-partners with reason for revenge. The randomness of it was chilling. Was this a stranger attack? Was someone targeting women in the area? Had Natalie stumbled onto something or someone she wasn't meant to see? Speculation began to spread through the community. Some whispered about a predator stalking the trails. Others suggested it had to be someone local, someone who knew the area well enough to find such a secluded spot. Parents grew fearful and local parks emptied out. Women avoided walking alone. The illusion of safety had been shattered, and yet despite the outcry, despite the desperation to catch someone, anyone, the case provided nothing to hold on to. The evidence didn't speak. The woods kept their silence, and with so few answers in hand, investigators were left to confront the terrifying possibility. Why would someone target Natalie? And how had they left so little behind? The initial hours after the discovery of Natalie Cartwright's body were chaotic but hopeful. Investigators worked around the clock, determined to find whoever had done this. But as hours turned to days and days to weeks, the leads began to thin until they nearly vanished altogether. Detectives from the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office launched a comprehensive review of Natalie's life. They spoke with her co-workers at East Haven Elementary, her church pastor, her close friends from the animal shelter, and even casual acquaintances. They looked into old social media posts, scanned through her text messages and emails, and checked her bank transactions and phone records. Nothing stood out. Natalie had no recent arguments, no signs of being followed, no evidence of anyone harboring resentment. Still, detectives pursued every possible angle. They entertained the idea that Natalie may have been followed home. Perhaps someone had been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right moment. That led them to review surveillance footage from businesses near the school and the road leading to the trail. Unfortunately, the path Natalie had taken that day led through mostly rural areas. The trailhead near Lake Macatawa, secluded and rarely monitored, had no cameras at all. One lead briefly stirred hope. A man named Keith Rollins, a local laborer with a record of misdemeanor assault in a neighboring county, had been seen near the trail days before Natalie's disappearance. He'd made inappropriate comments to a female hiker, and his name had come up in a tip. Detectives questioned him at length, but his alibi was airtight. He was out of state on the day Natalie vanished, confirmed by time-stamped truck logs from his delivery job. He was cleared. With that lead gone, detectives shifted focus back to the physical evidence. Natalie's body had yielded a few fragments of DNA, most likely from skin cells under her fingernails. But the sample was degraded, too weak to generate a complete profile with 2007 technology. Forensic analysts at the state lab tried multiple techniques, even reaching out to national experts, but each result came back the same: inconclusive. Desperate to reconstruct the crime, investigators reenacted Natalie's final known movements. They retraced her drive from the school to the trail, tested walking times, and analyzed cell phone tower data from the area. They timed how long it would have taken her to park, walk into the woods, and return. But the simulation offered no breakthroughs. No one saw her on the road. No camera caught her car. No witness remembered anything unusual. Meanwhile, the media turned Natalie's case into nightly news. Local stations featured emotional interviews with her parents, reminders of the reward for information, and timelines of the investigation. Public pressure mounted. Tip lines buzzed for weeks, but none of the information proved useful. One caller claimed she had seen a suspicious man watching children at the school. Another reported screams near the trail, but the timeline didn't match. Each promising thread unraveled upon inspection. By early 2008, the case began to lose momentum. Newer crimes required attention. Resources stretched thin. Detectives assigned to Natalie's case were rotated out or given other cases to balance. The Cartwright family remained persistent. They met with police regularly, pleaded in interviews, and organized awareness walks. But behind closed doors, investigators knew the truth. They were out of leads. A wall had been reached. No motive, no suspect, no strong forensic trail. The trail of evidence had gone cold almost as quickly as it had started. The pain of not knowing weighed heavily on everyone involved, especially her family, who refused to give up. Could anyone break through this mounting silence? As the seasons changed year after year, so too did the urgency around Natalie Cartwright's murder. What began in 2007 as a headline that gripped Michigan soon faded to the back pages. The public's attention shifted to new stories, new tragedies. The town of Holland resumed its routines. But for those closest to Natalie, time did not heal. It only deepened the wound. The investigation, once filled with promise and manpower, slowed to a crawl. Detectives who had spent weeks chasing every lead were reassigned. The cold case file grew thicker, but no new pages were being added. Evidence sat archived in temperature-controlled storage. The few pieces of DNA that had been collected remained in limbo, too damaged, too incomplete to provide a profile with the technology of the time. Natalie's family tried to keep her memory alive. Every October, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they hosted a candlelight vigil outside East Haven Elementary. Former students, teachers, and community members would gather to light candles, sing the songs Natalie once taught them, and speak her name into the night air. For a few hours each year, the silence was broken, but the rest of the time, that silence was unbearable. The music room where Natalie once brought children to life with rhythm and melody was eventually repurposed into a general arts classroom. Her desk was cleared, her nameplate tucked away. Her old classroom photo still hung in a hallway display for a time, until a new crop of students entered who had never known her name. Her mother, Carol Cartwright, once outgoing and deeply involved in her church and community events, slowly withdrew from public life. The light behind her eyes dimmed. Every holiday became a reminder of absence. Every birthday a symbol of loss. Her conversations narrowed, often circling back to the same unanswered questions. Did Natalie know her killer? Did she suffer? Why was no one held accountable? Her father, Walter, never fully recovered from the grief. Though he tried to maintain hope, his health began to decline. He passed away in 2016 from a sudden heart attack, just shy of what would have been Natalie's 35th birthday. He died without ever knowing who had taken his daughter's life or why. For the Holland Police Department, Natalie's case remained open, but inactive. Each year it was briefly reviewed, often without result. A few detectives took a second look here and there, re-interviewed witnesses, chased down rumors, but no meaningful new evidence surfaced. The trail had long since gone cold. Still, small ripples of remembrance endured. Former students, now grown, often mentioned Natalie on social media, sharing memories, photos, even stories of how her kindness had shaped their lives. A few became music teachers themselves, crediting her as their inspiration. These tributes were powerful, but they did little to dull the ache of unresolved justice. By 2020, it seemed the world had moved on. New technologies emerged and other cold cases made headlines after breakthroughs. But Natalie's name rarely surfaced. In a world drowning in new noise, her story had become a whisper, barely heard, rarely spoken aloud, and yet somewhere in that long silence, hope still flickered. Carol continued to push, contacting advocacy groups, writing letters to local officials, urging law enforcement to revisit the case. She refused to let Natalie become just another unsolved murder. Because to her, Natalie wasn't a file. She was her daughter, her best friend, her joy. But in the quiet halls of justice, where cases gather dust and hope often fades, was anyone still looking for Natalie's killer? 17 years after the brutal murder of Natalie Cartwright, a microscopic detail hidden in the shadows of time would become the unlikely key to unlocking the truth. In early 2024, the Michigan Cold Case Division, under renewed state funding and public pressure to address backlog cases, reopened Natalie's file. Detectives partnered with Verigan Labs, a private forensic company known for its work on degraded DNA. Advances in polymerase chain reaction, PCR techniques, had made it possible to extract readable profiles from evidence once thought unusable. For Natalie's case, that meant a second look at a piece of evidence most had forgotten about: minute skin cells found under her fingernails during the autopsy. At the time, the sample had been too damaged for any viable DNA sequencing, but Verigan's enhanced PCR method could now multiply even fragmented strands into analyzable data. It was a long shot, but they tried. After weeks of lab work, the results came back. The system didn't return a direct match, but something even more compelling: a familial hit. The DNA shared several key markers with a person in the combined DNA index system, CODIS, not the killer themselves, but a close relative. The match belonged to a 22-year-old man who had submitted his DNA as part of an unrelated misdemeanor case in a different state. That man had no known connection to Natalie Cartwright, but his family tree did. What followed was a meticulous behind-the-scenes investigation into the suspect's lineage. Investigators partnered with genealogists, building out a family map across multiple generations, comparing public records, birth certificates, social media profiles, and even obituaries. As branches formed and possibilities narrowed, one name began to rise to the surface: someone who had lived in Holland at the time of Natalie's murder: Brandon Avery. At 42 years old, Avery was an unassuming man with no prior convictions, no known history of violence, and no ties to Natalie, at least not at first glance. He lived just one county over and worked as a field technician for a maintenance company. But a deeper dive into archived employment records revealed that he had briefly worked at East Haven Elementary during the summer of 2007, contracted to repair windows and update door locks. Before the school year began, no one had remembered him during the initial investigation. His name never came up. He had slipped quietly through the system. Detectives began discreet surveillance. They tailed Avery over several days, eventually retrieving a discarded coffee cup from a gas station trash can. The cup was sent for testing, and the DNA matched the skin cells found under Natalie's fingernails. After 17 years, they had their suspect, but investigators didn't act immediately. They wanted more than a match. They wanted a timeline, a motive, a connection. They pulled Avery's phone records from 2007, which had been preserved by his former cell carrier in archived cloud storage. To their astonishment, GPS metadata from an old backup placed him near the Lake Makatawa trail system within the critical window the evening Natalie vanished. From there, everything moved quickly. Prosecutors were briefed. The arrest warrant was signed. After years of stillness, the gears of justice were turning again. Behind the scenes, the cold case team braced for impact. They knew that revealing the suspect's identity wouldn't just shake the family, it would rock the entire town, because the man they were about to arrest had lived quietly among them. He had been to their schools, walked their streets, blended into their community. Could this finally be the thread that unraveled everything? On the morning of April 15, 2024, the quiet rhythm of Holland, Michigan, was shattered by news that traveled faster than a siren. Brandon Avery, a 42-year-old maintenance contractor, was arrested in connection with the 2007 murder of Natalie Cartwright. He was taken into custody without incident outside a hardware supply store in Grand Rapids, where he had been picking up materials for a job. There was no struggle, no chase, just a simple, quiet exchange as officers approached him with a warrant, handcuffed him, and placed him into the back of an unmarked cruiser. For many, the name meant nothing. But for others, those who had children in East Haven Elementary in 2007, it rang a distant, uncomfortable bell. Avery had worked at the school during the summer before Natalie's death, contracted through a short-term facilities company to replace windows, repair doors, and install security hardware. His employment had lasted less than 6 weeks. He wasn't a permanent employee, didn't appear on the school's main roster, and left no strong impression. But he had been there, moving quietly through the halls, fixing classrooms, eating lunch in his van. When questioned, Avery claimed complete innocence. He said he barely remembered the job at East Haven and had no idea who Natalie Cartwright was. He called the DNA match a fluke and insisted the GPS data must have been wrong. He had never been near the Lake Macatawa trail, he told detectives, but the evidence said otherwise. The DNA under Natalie's fingernails was a perfect match, and GPS records from an old mobile phone backup, retrieved during the cold case investigation, placed his device within 500 yards of the trail between 5:03 and 6:22 p.m. on the evening of Natalie's disappearance. The combination was too precise to dismiss. When the news broke, the town of Holland recoiled in disbelief. Brandon Avery had been living just a few counties away for years. He'd worked jobs throughout western Michigan, passed unnoticed. Some parents who had kids at East Haven in 2007 vaguely remembered seeing him around the school grounds during construction. A few even recalled his white work van parked near the rear entrance. The idea that he could have moved so freely, lived undetected for 17 years, sent chills through the community. Natalie's family, upon hearing the news, released a brief statement. "We are overwhelmed with emotion. We have waited years for this day, and while nothing can bring Natalie back, we are grateful to the investigators who never stopped looking." Behind closed doors, the emotions were far more complex. Relief was mixed with anguish, gratitude with fury. Carol Cartwright, Natalie's mother, struggled to process the idea that the man responsible had slipped through the cracks, unnoticed for nearly 2 decades. She had walked past him once in a hardware store years ago and never realized it. That thought haunted her. Law enforcement held a press conference the following day. Prosecutors outlined the evidence, the DNA match, the GPS location, and the previously unknown connection to the school. They were confident, they said, that justice would finally be served. But they were also cautious, knowing the trial would be grueling, and that Avery was maintaining his innocence. As Brandon Avery sat behind bars awaiting arraignment, the people of Holland began to grapple with a difficult reality. The killer hadn't been a stranger in the night, but a man who walked their sidewalks, drank their coffee, and watched their lives from a distance. But would the justice system hold him accountable? The trial of Brandon Avery opened on October 23, 2024, in the Ottawa County Circuit Court. Nearly every seat in the courtroom was filled, including a reserved row for Natalie Cartwright's family, friends, and former colleagues, many of whom had waited 17 long years for this moment. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Sarah Finch, wasted no time establishing their narrative. They built their case on 3 core pillars: the DNA found under Natalie's fingernails, the GPS metadata linking Avery to the scene, and his previously undisclosed connection to East Haven Elementary. Finch methodically walked the jury through the chain of evidence: crime scene photos, expert testimony, lab reports, surveillance maps. It was a timeline reconstructed piece by piece. Natalie leaving school, her car discovered at the trail, Avery's digital footprint, putting him dangerously close during the key window. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the prosecution's case came when a forensic genealogist explained the DNA breakthrough, how a 17-year-old cold case had cracked open thanks to one microscopic trace of skin and a distant familial match. The jurors listened with rapt attention as the scientist described the process: hundreds of hours of analysis, tree building, and confirmation testing that had led directly to Avery. The prosecution also introduced 2 surprising witnesses, former co-workers of Avery's from a 2007 contracting firm. Both testified that during that summer, Avery had made crude, inappropriate remarks about female teachers while working inside school buildings. One claimed he had once said, "Some of them wouldn't even notice if you were watching them." The comments, unsettling at the time, now took on a far darker meaning. The defense, led by public defender Carla Meadows, attempted to discredit the reliability of the forensic evidence. She argued the DNA sample was small and had been stored for nearly 2 decades, leaving it vulnerable to contamination. She questioned the accuracy of the GPS records, noting that the location data came from a backup file, not real-time logs. Most importantly, she stressed the absence of motive. Why would Brandon Avery, who had no relationship with the victim, commit such a heinous crime? She asked the jury. This case is built on coincidence and assumption. Despite the arguments, the emotional weight of the trial never lifted. Each day brought graphic descriptions of the crime scene and autopsy findings. Natalie's family sat silently through every moment, Carol Cartwright clutching a locket with her daughter's photo, her hands trembling. Friends from Natalie's church and school wiped tears as photos of her classroom, her final lesson plan, and the wooded trail were presented. The jury deliberated for just 8 hours. On November 2, 2024, the verdict was read aloud. We, the jury, find the defendant Brandon Avery guilty of first-degree murder. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Quiet sobs echoed from the gallery. Natalie's mother bowed her head, her tears flowing freely. There were no cheers, no applause, only the heavy release of held breath, the raw sound of years of grief cracking open. Avery was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had finally been delivered. But even in victory, questions remained. Why Natalie? Why that day? Why that trail? Avery offered no confession, no explanation. He simply stared ahead as the sentence was read, silent and unmoved. For Natalie's loved ones, the verdict offered closure, but not full understanding. And for the town of Holland, it left a deeper question. What lessons does this case leave behind? Justice had finally arrived for Natalie Cartwright, but her story didn't end in the courtroom. In fact, for many in Michigan, it was just beginning. In the weeks following Brandon Avery's conviction, East Haven Elementary took action to ensure Natalie's memory would never fade. The school board voted unanimously to rename the music wing where she once taught, transforming it into the Cartwright Music Center. On the morning of the dedication, hundreds gathered, teachers, students, parents, and neighbors. A mural of Natalie was unveiled, smiling, seated at a piano, surrounded by notes and lyrics from the children's songs she once played. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Her music never stopped, it just found new voices." But the tribute didn't stop at the school. A statewide initiative led by the Michigan Department of Education established the Natalie Cartwright Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to students pursuing degrees in music education. Within the first year, over 200 applicants submitted essays about the impact of music in their lives, many of them inspired directly by Natalie's story. Former students, now in their 20s and 30s, began speaking publicly about her influence. Some recalled her staying late after school to help with auditions. Others remembered how she had comforted them during hard times using only a melody and a kind word. "She was more than a teacher," said one former student at the dedication ceremony. "She was the reason I found my voice." Natalie's story also sparked something larger, a reckoning with how Michigan handled its cold cases. Journalists revisited dozens of unsolved murders from the early 2000s, highlighting gaps in forensic funding and the backlog of untested DNA evidence. Lawmakers were moved to act. In late 2024, the Michigan State Legislature passed a bipartisan bill increasing resources for forensic testing, allocating additional staff to the state crime lab, and requiring annual reviews of all cold case files over 10 years old. Natalie's mother, Carol, emerged as a powerful voice in the aftermath. Though grief still weighed heavy, she found new purpose in advocacy. She launched Echo Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to improving turnaround times for DNA analysis and increasing transparency in cold case handling. The group quickly gained momentum, joining national coalitions and providing support to other families who felt forgotten. Carol spoke at universities, forensic science conferences, and even testified before Congress. Her message was simple but powerful. No family should wait 17 years for answers when the truth is sitting in storage. Public pressure, combined with Natalie's now iconic case, helped push Michigan to become one of the first states to partner full-time with private forensic labs for cold case DNA reanalysis. Within 6 months, 2 other unsolved cases had leads reopened because of this policy change. But beyond the reforms and headlines, Natalie's legacy was deeply human. Her name became synonymous with grace, strength, and perseverance. Her story, tragic as it was, reminded people of the impact one life can have. In classrooms, churches, and living rooms across Michigan, people spoke of her with reverence. Her former students carried her lessons forward, not just in music, but in compassion. Carol still visits the Cartwright Music Center twice a month. She sits quietly in the back row during student recitals, listening as new generations bring melodies to life in the room her daughter once filled with joy. Natalie's death left an unfillable void, but her life left a legacy that refuses to be silenced. In the end, Natalie's life didn't fade. It echoed. 17 years after Natalie Cartwright vanished from a quiet Michigan town, justice has finally been served. What began as a chilling mystery, an unsolved murder buried under layers of silence and time, has ended in accountability, thanks to tireless dedication, unyielding love, and groundbreaking advances in DNA technology. Natalie wasn't just another statistic. She was a music teacher who lit up her classroom, a daughter who called her parents every evening, a friend who brought comfort in the smallest gestures. Her life mattered, and her death demanded answers. This case is more than a cold case solved. It's a reminder of what can happen when people refuse to forget. Investigators who could have moved on instead pressed forward. A mother who lost everything turned her grief into fuel for justice. And scientists, armed with evolving tools, were able to amplify what the past once tried to bury. Natalie's story now stands as a symbol of possibility for other families who still wait in the dark. It reminds us that no matter how much time has passed, no life is too small, no case too old, and no truth too far gone. For every silent file gathering dust, for every unanswered question left behind, let Natalie's legacy remind us, the truth may sleep, but it never dies. And justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth the fight. If this story moved you, consider sharing it. Let her voice echo. Let her legacy continue.